What happens when a quiet evening at home turns into a moment of undeniable tension? As Emma washes the dishes, a familiar presence looms behind her, sparking a dangerous connection that could change everything. With her husband out, will she give in to temptation or fight to keep her boundaries intact? Stay tuned to discover how one choice can alter the course of a life. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories. On that particular night, unlike any other, I was doing the dishes, savoring the rare quiet when my husband stepped out. Suddenly, I felt a warm breath right behind me. I hadn't heard the door open or any footsteps, but there he was, my husband's friend, standing so close. He didn't speak or touch me, yet his presence was unmistakable. The silence lingered until he whispered, "You felt it too, right?" I should have left, but I froze, and in that moment, everything changed. My name is Emma Carter, 32 years old, living in a small house in Brooklyn, New York, with my husband, Daniel. The kitchen was softly lit by the pendant lamp above the sink, the sound of running water filling the air as I dipped my hands into the warm, soapy suds. A sense of comfort spread through my fingers. Tonight was unusually quiet, a rare silence I seldom experienced. Daniel had just left to grab a few things for breakfast from the grocery store on Atlantic Avenue. I nodded, continuing with the remaining dishes. I cherished this time alone with no TV noise or constant chatter, just peaceful silence and the steady sound of running water. I sighed in relief, letting the warmth of the water soak into my skin, soothing the aches and pains of the day. My movements became rhythmic, almost meditative. Pick up the plate, scrub it clean, rinse it under the faucet, place it on the rack, and repeat. It was a simple yet peaceful sequence. Outside the window, the streetlights cast a hazy glow on the wet pavement, reflecting pale yellow streaks across the glass. In the distance, the sound of honking horns echoed off the busy street, reminding me that the city never truly slept. I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the last bit of silence before Daniel returned, before life resumed. But then, just when I thought I was completely alone, a sudden chill crept down my spine. I hadn't heard the door open, but there was an inexplicable feeling that made me freeze. A presence right behind me made my body stiffen. Instinct told me someone was standing right there. My breath caught in my throat as a familiar scent flooded my senses, the faint aroma of sandalwood and tobacco. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Lucas Hale, Daniel's best friend since college. I clenched the wet plate in my hand, trying to keep myself calm. Reason told me that maybe I was just overreacting, maybe Lucas had just stopped by to say hello. But if that was the case, why hadn't I heard his footsteps? Why was he standing so close that I could feel the warmth of his body against my back? I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain calm. "What are you doing here, Lucas?" I heard a low, soft chuckle against the back of my neck, a shiver running down my spine. "Just wanted to look at you," he said. The answer was vague, unclear. I continued washing the dishes, trying to pretend I wasn't aware of his every breath, his every movement. But the silence that stretched between us was uncomfortable, heavy, and thick, like an invisible string tightening the space around us. His eyes, I didn't look, but I could feel them like a sharp blade sliding across my skin. "You're so quiet for someone who just walked in." I tried to keep my voice calm, but even I could hear the strain in it. "Didn't want to bother you," he said, the sarcasm hidden in every word. I bit my lip, gripping the edge of the sink. The water was still running, but I couldn't feel its warmth anymore. Lucas shifted, just a small movement, but enough for me to realize that the distance between us had changed. He came closer. I turned my head slightly, enough to catch his image in my peripheral vision. The pale yellow light from the kitchen lamp cast sharp shadows and light on Lucas's face. His eyes locked on mine, black, silent, and filled with something unreadable. A slow smirk tugged at the corners of his lips as if he knew something I didn't. I clenched my fists, a knot of unease twisting in my stomach, a kind of silent warning in my mind. I didn't like this. The way Lucas was looking at me, the way he was standing so close, the thick air that hung in the kitchen. I cleared my throat, trying to control my breathing. "Where's my husband?" I asked, my voice light but tense. Lucas shrugged, still smiling. Still out? He paused, tilted his head. Thought you might need someone to be with. My stomach clenched. Not at the words themselves, but the way he said them, like he knew exactly what each word would do to me, like he was testing me. I swallowed, trying to relax my body. I don't need anyone. I'm just washing dishes. My voice was a little harder. Lucas leaned against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes never leaving mine. Do you always work this hard? He asked. I forced a smile, trying to keep things light. Someone has to clean up after dinner. But Lucas didn't smile. Instead, he tilted his head, his gaze slowly tracing over my face as if assessing something. I don't think Daniel appreciates you enough, he said. I froze, turning my head completely, my eyes meeting his. What? Lucas didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, deep and penetrating, as if searching for something inside me. When he spoke, his voice was lower, a hidden sharpness behind it. He leaves you alone too much. The air in the kitchen felt thick. I gripped the sink handle, trying to keep my breathing normal. This was a boundary, a fragile boundary that had just been pushed to its limit. I could feel it in the air, and Lucas knew it too. I turned back to the sink, trying to ignore the tension that coiled in my chest. The water was still running, the steady murmur a reminder that I was here in my own kitchen with nothing to worry about, just a normal conversation, just Lucas. But I couldn't ignore the feeling of his presence hovering just behind me, closer than necessary. Then he shifted again, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel his warmth through the thin fabric of my shirt, invisible but impossible to ignore. I clenched my jaw. Part of me wanted to turn around, to face him, to make it clear that he should leave now. But another part, a deeper, more dangerous part, told me that I shouldn't move because if I moved, if I looked at him, I would have to admit something I didn't know, which would be worse. After a long moment, I heard Lucas speak. You should stop. His voice was low and slow, as if each word had been carefully chosen to fall into the space between us with an invisible weight. I froze. Stop what? I tried to keep my voice steady, but it wasn't as steady as before. Lucas didn't answer right away. I could feel his eyes moving along the back of my neck, considering something. Then he took a step back, the sudden distance strangely jarring. Okay, he said, his voice unreadable. See you later. I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath the whole time. I heard his footsteps echo through the quiet house. A moment later, the front door closed. He was gone. I stood there, staring at the water running into the sink, trying to steady my breathing. But no matter how hard I tried, the feeling of his presence remained, and I knew deep down that this wouldn't be the last time I'd feel him behind me. I clenched my fists, a strange feeling welling up in my chest, something that wasn't fear but also not quite safety. I thought it was over. I was wrong. A few minutes later I heard footsteps, slow and cautious, coming back. I spun around, my heart racing, part of me hoping to see Daniel. Maybe he'd forgotten something and come back to get it. But no, it was Lucas. He stood in the doorway, his figure casting a shadow on the floor. His eyes didn't leave me, unwavering, no hesitation, no regrets. I swallowed. Why are you still here? Lucas didn't answer right away. He stepped inside, slamming the door behind him, slowly and deliberately. I flinched at the sound. Lucas tilted his head, his eyes dark, his voice light but dangerous. You forgot something. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too claustrophobic. I knew I should run away now, but my feet wouldn't move. You should go, Lucas. My voice was harder than before, but I wasn't sure if it was strong enough to drive him away. A slow smile spread across his lips. Not exactly cheerful, but lazy and knowing. You feel it too, don't you, Emma? I took a breath, feeling the line between us completely blur. Lucas stepped closer, slowly, moderately, until there was only a breath between us. He trusts you, he whispered, his breath fanning my cheek. Maybe too much. I gripped the edge of the counter, my control slipping. The air between us was as thick as an undiscovered secret. I felt Lucas's hand brush my arm, just barely, a delicate touch but enough to send a jolt of electricity down my spine. I should have pushed him away. I should have said something. Instead, I just stood still, his lips hovering dangerously above mine, waiting. And then the sound of a car pulling into the driveway hit like a bucket of cold water. I froze. So did Lucas. We both realized what had almost happened. I pushed him away, breathing hard. Go now. Lucas looked at me for a long moment, his eyes dark, but he didn't protest. He backed away, one last look, then he disappeared through the back door. My hands shook as I pressed them to my chest, trying to slow my frantic heartbeat. A few seconds later, the front door opened. Daniel walked in, completely unaware of what had happened. Baby, I got everything we need. I took a breath, forcing myself to turn around, hiding everything that had just happened. Daniel set the bags on the counter, wrapped his arms around my waist, and pressed a kiss to my temple. Are you okay? You look a little flushed. I swallowed, nodding quickly. Yeah, it's probably just the steam. Daniel laughed. I told you not to overwork yourself. I tried to laugh along, but as I helped him unpack, I could still feel the ghost of Lucas's touch lingering on my skin. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I tried to control my breathing as I helped Daniel unpack the groceries. My heart was still beating faster than normal, and every time my hands accidentally touched the cold cardboard box or the smooth surface of a milk bottle, I flinched as if they might melt the fragile shell I was trying to hold onto. Daniel didn't notice anything unusual. He laughed about something. Maybe the new neighbors or a random story he heard on the radio while driving. I nodded, chuckling at the appropriate times, but my mind couldn't leave what had just happened. Lucas, his silence, his presence, the way he stood so close, the way his eyes locked on me as if he knew how I would react before I knew it myself. And worst of all, the way my body had betrayed me. Nothing had happened, not really. I'd pushed him away. I'd told him to go. But what if Daniel's car hadn't come right then? What if I hadn't had a reason to stop? The thought made my stomach twist. I didn't want to think about it, but it stuck with me, seeping into every corner of my mind like an indelible stain. Daniel reached out and hugged me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. Are you sure you're okay? I stiffened for a moment before forcing myself to relax into his arms. Yeah, just tired. Daniel kissed my neck lightly before turning back to put the things in the fridge. I stood there watching him busily arrange everything neatly, completely oblivious. He trusted me. He trusted Lucas. I bit my lip, guilt rising like a tidal wave. I didn't do anything wrong, but would that still be true if a small part of me hadn't wanted Lucas to leave right then? I couldn't answer. In the days that followed, I tried to forget everything. I pretended it never happened, like the touch on my wrist was just an illusion, like Lucas's breath right next to my lips wasn't enough to make me feel the danger of it. But the thing was, I couldn't. The way I felt his presence before I even saw him, the way he knew exactly what I was thinking, all of it made it impossible to erase him from my mind. And Lucas wouldn't let me forget. He wouldn't. Nothing but that made me even more uneasy. Every time I went to the grocery store, I felt like someone was watching me. Every time I passed the coffee shop near my house, I felt someone's eyes on me from across the street. And one night, as I stood in the kitchen pouring water, I felt it before I even saw him. My heart sank. I knew where he was. I looked up and saw Lucas standing right outside the kitchen window in the dark. The streetlights were just enough to make out the outline of his face, his eyes sharp, the corners of his mouth slightly turned up as if he knew exactly what I was feeling right then. I never thought that one sentence could turn everything I believed in upside down. A simple sentence, but with power, temptation, and unforeseen consequences. It all started late one evening at the office. I was cleaning up my desk after a long day when a familiar deep voice rang out from behind me. Emma, do you have a minute? I turned around to see Vincent Mercer, the CEO of the company and my direct boss for the past 10 years. At 58, he still had the confidence and authority of a man who had built an empire with his own two hands. I had no idea that tonight's conversation would change everything. "You've worked hard," Vincent said, his eyes piercing me. "I see your potential, and I think it's time you got the opportunity you deserve." My heart pounded. It was something I had been waiting for years. But why now? "Do you want a higher position?" he continued, his voice calm. "A private office, triple the salary, and the right to decide on big projects." I nodded a little nervously. "Of course, but why me?" Vincent smiled inscrutably. "Because I believe you are the best person for it." I knew he never made an offer without a reason. There was always something behind those vague words, but I couldn't refuse. This was my only chance to escape my current situation. Ethan's hospital bills were mounting, and I was exhausted both physically and mentally. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice low but full of meaning. I took a deep breath. "I need to know the terms." Vincent's smile deepened. "I want your absolute loyalty, Emma." A chill ran down my spine. What did that mean? The conversation continued for a few more minutes. Nothing was said outright. No conditions were stated, but everything was understood. I was no longer a greenhorn. I knew how the world worked. I knew that there were things that could not be achieved through hard work alone. But was I willing to pay the price? "I'm not forcing you, Emma," Vincent said, sipping his wine. "It's just an offer. But I would advise you to think carefully because opportunities like this don't always come around again." I stood up, my mind reeling. I knew what I should say. I should refuse immediately, stick to my principles. Instead, I just said, "I'll think about it." Vincent nodded, his eyes seeming to see through my thoughts. "I look forward to your answer." I left the office with 100 thoughts in my head. The suggestion still rang in my ears like an annoying tune that I couldn't turn off. I walked quickly through the hallway, feeling someone's eyes on me. I shook my head, telling myself that I was imagining things. When I got home, Ethan was sitting in the dark. He was no longer the vibrant man I had fallen in love with. Since the accident, he had become distant, as if he had abandoned himself. "You're late." His voice was low and emotionless. I smiled slightly, hiding my confusion. "There's a lot of work." Ethan nodded, then turned to the window, not asking any more questions. I looked at him for a moment, trying to find the connection between us, but it had faded with time. I walked into the bedroom, closed the door, and threw myself on the bed. Vincent wanted my loyalty, but in what way? Am I overthinking it, or is he actually giving me a moral test? I stared at the ceiling, conflicted. I knew I needed an answer, but I wasn't sure if it was the answer I really wanted to give. I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. Last night I had thought a lot about Vincent's offer. It wasn't clear, it wasn't specific, but deep down in his words, I knew he wanted something more than just loyalty. I told myself that I had no obligation to agree, but was that really true? If I refused, would I be passed over for promotion? Would I be able to continue doing this job without being affected? And if I agreed, what was the real price? I sat up and looked at Ethan. He was still sleeping, his face calm but looking much older than before. I missed the days when he always brought me warmth and stability. But since the accident, the distance between us had grown. He gradually withdrew, and I gradually got used to the feeling of loneliness in my own home. The next day, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I needed time to organise my thoughts before seeing Vincent again, but that didn't stop me from feeling uneasy as I walked through the hallway. Were people staring at me longer than usual? Or was it just my imagination? When I opened my inbox, there was an email from Vincent. "I hope you thought about my proposal. If you can meet me at the office at 7 tonight to discuss it further." I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part of me was urging me to hear what he wanted clearly before making a decision. In the afternoon, I left the conference room and ran into Sophie, a close colleague of mine. She looked at me with a strange look. "Emma, Are you okay? She asked. I frowned. Of course, why would you ask? Sophie looked around and pulled me aside, her voice low. I don't know if it's my imagination, but lately I've noticed my boss looking at you differently. My heart was beating faster. What do you mean? She hesitated. It's just, he's not usually that interested in anyone. Are you sure there's nothing going on? I smiled softly, trying to sound casual. I don't know what you're thinking, but it's nothing. He's just looking at new positions. Sophie still wasn't entirely convinced, but she didn't ask any further. I breathed a sigh of relief. If even Sophie could see this, maybe I should be more careful. The clock struck 7 p.m. I stood in front of Vincent's office door, feeling my heart beat faster than usual. I could turn around and leave right now, but I didn't. I needed to know the truth. I knocked and entered. Vincent was sitting in a chair, his eyes never leaving me as I approached his desk. I'm glad you came, he said, his voice as calm as ever. I sat down, keeping my face as calm as possible. I'd like to hear more about your proposal. Vincent smiled, his hands clasped together. I know you're a smart woman, Emma, and I think you know what I mean. I clenched my fists. What do you want from me? He looked at me for a long moment before answering. I want someone by my side, someone I can trust completely, and I think you're the perfect person for that. I felt my spine stiffen. I don't think my job requires that. Vincent tilted his head, his eyes sharp. No, of course not, but you've worked hard, and I want to make sure you get what you deserve. He paused, then continued. But the world isn't all about effort, Emma. Sometimes bold decisions make all the difference. I took a deep breath. And if I say no? Vincent shrugged. I'd be disappointed, but I can't force you. However, all I can say is opportunities like this don't come around twice. A silence fell over us. I knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a threat, but a warning. If I said no, the door to promotion might be closed forever. I left the office with a confused mind. Part of me wanted to scream in anger. Why did I have to deal with this? I worked harder than anyone else, and my promotion came with a hidden condition. But another part of me asked, what if this was my only chance? Was I willing to give it up? When I got home, Ethan was waiting for me. He looked at me for a long moment and said, You seem nervous. Is something wrong? I smiled, shaking my head. Nothing, just a long day. He nodded, but I knew he was still suspicious. I couldn't tell him the truth, not now, maybe never. I sat on the bed, feeling like I was stuck between two paths. One path was safety, morality, principles that I had always believed in. The other path was a chance to change my life, but with it came things I never thought I would face. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. Should I accept Vincent's offer? I woke up feeling heavier than ever. Thoughts of my conversation with Vincent kept running through my head, haunting me like a never-ending nightmare. I didn't sleep well all night. I knew I was at a crossroads, a decision that could change my entire future. I looked at Ethan. He was still fast asleep, breathing steadily. I wondered if Ethan were me. What would he do? Would he be willing to make the trade-off to bring us both a better life? Or would he stick to his principles and accept this difficult life? I didn't know, but I knew I couldn't keep running away. That morning, I went to work with a different feeling. I had made up my mind. I couldn't keep waiting, torn by choices I hadn't dared to face. When I walked into my office, my inbox showed a new email from Vincent, just a short line. Tonight, my office. There was no further explanation, no further details, but I knew exactly what he wanted. The rest of the day passed in a fog of discomfort. I couldn't concentrate on anything. Questions kept repeating in my head. Am I doing the right thing or the wrong thing? Is this an opportunity or a trap? Sophie could tell something was wrong with me. Emma, are you okay? I smiled weakly. Just tired. She studied me for a moment as if trying to read my mind, but didn't ask any more questions. The clock struck 7. I stood in front of Vincent's office door, taking a deep breath before knocking. Come in. His voice was deep but authoritative. I stepped in, closing the door behind me. Vincent was standing by the window, his hands in his pockets, looking out at the city. He didn't turn around immediately. There was a long silence. Finally, he spoke. "I guess you've thought it through." I nodded, keeping my voice calm. "I want to understand. What does it mean if I say yes?" Vincent turned back, his sharp eyes studying my every move. "It means you get everything you want, a higher position, a more stable life, and most importantly, you get me by your side." He said it so calmly, as if it were a normal transaction, but to me it wasn't normal. I took a deep breath. "I'm not sure I can do this." Vincent stepped closer, his voice low. "Emma, you're a smart woman. I know you understand what's going on. I'm not asking you to do anything you don't want to do. I'm just offering you a chance. Another way." I closed my eyes for a moment. Another way. I couldn't deny that part of me was tempted, but another part, the part of me that I had always believed in, was screaming at me to back off. And I chose to listen. I opened my eyes, looking straight at Vincent. "I appreciate the opportunity you're offering, but I can't do this. I can't trade myself for a higher position." A silence fell over the room. Vincent studied me for a long moment, and then he smiled softly. "I guess I underestimated you." I wasn't sure what that meant, but I didn't care anymore. I had made my decision. I stood up. "Thank you, Vincent. I think our conversation is over." He nodded. "I wish you luck, Emma, but remember, not everyone gets a second chance." I left the office feeling like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had said no. I had held myself together. I arrived home later than usual. Ethan was waiting for me, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm fine. I've just had a long day." Ethan looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "I don't know what you've been through, but I believe you made the right decision." I paused. "What do you mean?" He smiled softly. "Emma, I've known you long enough to know when you're struggling with something. I don't need to know the details, but I know you would never do anything that would go against yourself, and that makes me proud." I felt a lump in my throat. I didn't expect that of all people. Ethan would be the one to help me believe in myself. I sat down next to him and took his hand. "Thank you." Ethan squeezed my hand, saying nothing more. That night, I slept better than I ever had before. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe I would never get to the top of the company. Maybe Vincent would find a way to make things difficult for me. But I knew one thing for sure. I hadn't lost myself, and that mattered more than anything. Thank you for following and listening to our story today. We really appreciate your support. However, we want to emphasize that this is a completely fictional story, not based on any real events. But through this story, we want to ask a question. When faced with a difficult decision, will you stick to your principles or accept the trade-off? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you sympathize with Emma? What would you do if you were in a similar situation? Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories. See you again.